So good day, everyone, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the webinar Careers Inside and Outside of Academia panel discussion organized as an EGU webinar. So my name is Veronica Peverelli. I am a postdoc at Trinity College Dublin in Ireland, and I am also a member of the early career scientist team of the Geochemistry, Mineralogy, Petrology, and Volcanology division of the European Geosciences Union. And my role in the team is to organize short courses during the General Assembly of EGU and also events like this one. Today, I am joined by 4 other moderators. We have Edoardo Sanita, also a postdoc from the University of Pisa. Kazid Ahmad is also a postdoc at the University of Lorraine in France. We also have Michele Rinaldi, also postdoc from Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. And finally, we have Guto Paiva Silva, PhD student at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, Brazil. We are mainly members of the GMPV division, but Eduardo is a member of the Tectonics and Structural Geology division. So today's webinar is going to be subdivided basically into 2 parts. There's going to be a panel discussion where the 4 amazing panelists that we have today and that I will introduce in a few moments will participate in a discussion that will cover basically 3 areas. So one will be what it's like to work in a given sector, whether in or outside of academia. What it's like to transition between sectors and also within sectors, so choosing another job within academia, for example. And finally, the impact of our career choices on our non-professional life. After that, we will have a Q&A session, and you can answer your questions through Slido. So you have the QR code here. I ask you to keep it friendly and within the scope of the webinar, which is to provide insight into career path for geoscientists. So this is not a networking event or a job hunting event. And you can also ask your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Slido allows you to ask your questions anonymously, and I'm not sure about the Q&A button in the Zoom. And you're very welcome to ask your questions also during the panel discussion so that we can start gathering them. And if they are particularly relevant, we may actually decide to ask them during the panel discussion. So moving on to the main characters of today's webinar, we have Professor Robin Pickering from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, Dr. Sara Callegaro from the University of Bologna in Italy, Dr. Simon Clark, project manager in the European Geosciences Union, science communicator and charity co-founder. And finally, we have Professor Murray Hitzman from University College Dublin in Ireland and also director of ICRAG also in Ireland. Now I'm going to introduce all of them one by one. So starting from Professor Robin Pickering. Robin is an isotope geochemist whose research intersects with human evolution and archaeology. Her work focuses on understanding the timing and environmental context of early human evolution at fossil and archaeological sites, mainly in South Africa. She has been at the University of Cape Town for the past 10 years, where she leads a dynamic research group and where she has established the first uranium series dating laboratory in Africa, pioneering innovative and cost-effective dating techniques. Prior to this, Robin was a postdoc at the University of Melbourne in Australia, a PhD candidate at the University of Bern in Switzerland, and an undergraduate at the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. So she has extensive experience of mobility in academia. As co-director of the Human Evolution Research Institute, Robin is committed to transforming narratives around human evolution by challenging patriarchal and neocolonial perspectives in geoscience, with an emphasis on improving field experiences for women and underprivileged students. Robin has received numerous prestigious awards. She has also played a key role in public engagement efforts, including museum exhibitions, a TEDx talk, and science communication articles. Beyond academia, Robin enjoys family with her 2 kiddos, swimming in the sea, baking, and listening to podcasts. So moving on to Dr. Sara Callegaro. Sarah is an igneous petrologist and geochemist. She studied large igneous provinces throughout her career, reconstructing their mantle sources, their interaction with the crust, and their degassing to the atmosphere. She graduated in geosciences at the University of Padua in Italy and got her PhD there. She then joined the Center for Earth Evolution and Dynamics at the University of Oslo in Norway from 2016 to 2024. She recently joined the Department of Biological, Geological, and Environmental Sciences at the University of Bologna in Italy as a tenure-track researcher. And she will soon start an ERC project on reconstructing sources and sinks of degassing from large igneous provinces. She firmly believes in the fundamental role of fieldwork activities in geology and on making these activities as accessible as possible. And when not working, she can be found cycling, skiing, knitting, taking care of her vineyard, or worshipping cats. We then have Dr. Simon Clark. Simon is the project manager at the Executive Office of the European Geosciences Union, where they oversee community, organizational, and project development. A science communicator with a PhD in climate change and risk modeling, Simon strives to make science accessible by engaging non-expert audiences, from artists and policymakers to the broader public. Simon is also a co-founder and former director of an LGBTQIA+ sports charity and delivers workshops on LGBTQIA+ inclusion, science communication, and career development. And last but not least, we have Professor Murray Hitzman. Murray is a professor in the School of Earth Sciences at the University College Dublin, and he's also the director of the Research Ireland Centre for Applied Geosciences, ICRAG. Murray has a bachelor's degree in anthropology and geology from Dartmouth College, a master's degree in geology from the University of Washington, and a PhD in geology from Stanford University, all of them in the US. He started his career after his PhD with Chevron Resources, undertaking mineral exploration worldwide, and is credited with the discovery of the Leishin zinc lead silver deposit in Ireland in 1990. He moved to Washington, D.C. in the mid-1990s to work as a fellow in the US Senate and then as a policy analyst in the White House Office of Science and Technology. He then moved to Colorado School of Mines as the Charles Fogarty Professor of Economic Geology, and in 2016 he returned to government, serving as Associate Director for Energy and Minerals at the U.S. Geological Survey. He has served on the boards of a number of mineral exploration companies and currently serves as Technical Advisor for Cobalt Metals. So it's great to have all of you on board. Welcome. And I think that we are ready. I am going to stop sharing. So we're going to start with the panel discussion, and I would like to start with an opening remark, which would be, how would each one of you define the concept of a career path, and do you think the career paths should be or are always linear and one-way roads, or are they more winding? And I guess we can start from my top right, which is Robin.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you for the invitation to be on the panel. Yeah, I think this is a really great first question. And I had to really think about my answer to this, because I think certainly a perception I have held, and I think is widely held, is that we expect our careers to be pretty linear and straightforward. But I don't know if this is the best expectation to have. And it certainly hasn't really been my experience in my career. And I think, you know, finding something that you are good at and that you like and that brings you satisfaction is much more important than like this sort of perceived of like the smooth upward trajectory through your career. So I think, yeah, we really need to think about, it's a great place to start, is even thinking about like, what is a career path?
Thank you, Robin. I think we can move on to the next one, which is Sarah.
Yeah, I'm thinking that a career path is really like when you put up a GPS system to go somewhere. So you have a destination in mind, right? But the road can change because things can happen. You can have a detour. You can stop for a coffee. So yes, it's not an upward trajectory and a stable, let's say linear. Let's say it's not a straight line. But it's nice if you have some of a goal or a destination in mind, that for sure helps. And of course, you can also change the destination, because I think it's perfectly fine, and we need to normalize the fact that some of us might just change our mind with time and say, look, this is not what I wanted. I want to change my perspective and my destination. So a career path is really what you want it to be, I think.
Thank you. Then we have Murray.
Yeah, I would agree with what both Robin and Sarah said. Career path is a good thing to have in your mind, but don't expect that you're actually going to go that way. Like Sarah said, it's sort of like a GPS in the directions you get from Google. You may have an end point, but things happen along the way, and my career has been that way entirely. I've bounced to places I never expected to be, all of which have been fantastic, but not expected.
Thank you. And finally, we go to Simon.
So I think when I think of careers, I think of it less of a path and more like a river. So it may meander, and especially in unexpected ways, but all the tributaries of your experience and work you do all contribute to that momentum nonetheless. I think one key lesson I got with planning my career came from actually project management work, where you can plan and plan a project as much as you can, but you'll never know everything, and new information and new needs come forward all the time. And a good project manager knows when to change their timelines accordingly. So basically kind of echoing what everyone said here, you kind of got to be adaptive, have a plan, but also kind of take opportunities as they come, I think is how I see it. I'll also quickly add that whilst what I talk about, I think today will be kind of idealized or, well, the kind of stuff I'm most proud of, I think it's also good to kind of demythologize career paths. I've also worked in restaurants, behind bars, on bars, at receptions and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of grit behind the scenes to acknowledge.
Thank you. So maybe I'm going to stay with Simon for a second. What are the differences between science and research, but also in work culture inside and outside of academia in your experience? And what are the pros and cons of your specific sector at the moment?
That's a good question. I think to generalize, what I found is working outside academia. So I've worked with industry and private sector, with quasi and NGOs, and I find private sector work, etc., focuses a lot more on relational work. So I feel like psychosocial skills, sometimes called soft skills, are much more valued there. You need to understand that work is relational, that the timeframes are different, often outputs needed much more quickly. You need to be more of a team player, I think. Whereas compared to working in academia, I think there's a lot more freedom there individually, but also that kind of individualism comes a bit more isolation, I think. There's a lot more effort needed to kind of build networks. So yeah, I think basically the main thing that comes to mind is that kind of that psychosocial skills. I think they're more valued somewhat in the private sector compared to academia, but I think they're still important for academia as well.
Do you agree, Murray?
Yeah, I think it is. Each one of them are different. I think each one of them does require social skills, but in different ways. So Simon's is right that in the private sector, an awful lot of it, because you're usually not the boss, you start somewhere down lower. You're relating upwards and with the group. In academia, you can be more independent, but nonetheless, especially these days, success really is built relationships among research groups, among researchers, often at your own institution, but other institutions. Certainly here in Europe, that's the case. So, and in government, it's the same. You have to work with numbers of people. So I think whatever you do in whatever sector you're in, the social aspect actually is very important.
So I'm going to, before we move on to Robin and Sarah, I wanted to take a question from the audience. Eduardo?
Yes, the question is, how important is having a PhD in industry? Did it open more doors, higher roles than colleagues without a PhD?
I can jump in and answer that if that's okay, Veronica.
Yes, absolutely.
So a PhD, it can be very important. Certainly for the top positions in most industries I've seen, most of those people have PhDs. Not all, but many. It does open doors. To any younger person thinking about whether to do a PhD or not, clearly to go into academia, you have to have a PhD, right? Really. In government, in most governments, having a PhD allows you to get into positions you otherwise would not be considered for. And I would say it's the same in industry. So is it absolutely necessary? No, not at all. Is it helpful? Absolutely.
I would like to hear also Robin's and Sarah's perspective. Maybe we can start from my top right, which is Sarah.
Yeah, so I think a good thing about academia is really the intellectual freedom that you get, which is a pro, but is also a con when you kind of, you know, over a career, you need to keep having ideas, good ideas that are at the top of the notch. So we need to be careful with this. It's good to have intellectual independence, but sometimes it might be scary, especially, you know, when you're starting a career like that. But overall, I would say that's the absolute, you know, you can do things that are fun and you can do things that are what we call curiosity-driven research is really cool and is really fun to do, and it keeps, you know, renovating itself. It keeps bringing new perspectives and what's not. And also one thing I'm thinking of is actually the prestige that still comes with this kind of role or job in you know, in society. Being a university professor, being an academic is really still prestigious, despite maybe being less remunerative of a job with respect to the industry. So that are for sure the cons, let's say, and the pros of being in academia.
What about Robin? What do you think?
Yeah, I've only ever been in academia, but I liked the point that Simon made, because I've also had lots of other jobs, right? Like I worked as an au pair, as a waitress. I did some kind of vocational work as a student in industry, in the mining industry in South Africa. So I did get some sense of other jobs, and I chose academia because I just really liked the education sector. And I think a pro for me with academia is I really enjoy teaching. I love working in education in general. It's obviously tertiary education, but I really love that aspect of it. So for me, that's a real pro of being in academia, but I don't have much experience of other workforces to speak to.
Maybe a bit of a provocative question for the people who have jumped back and forth between sectors. Can we say that academia is somehow out of passion and industry is more out of necessity sometimes? I see you're all frowning. Can we be passionate about working in industry? Maybe it's another way to phrase this. Do you want to comment on that, Mary?
Sure. I think you can be passionate about any of these things. What do you want to do? It depends on what your goal is. When I started out after my PhD, I really wanted to find an ore deposit. That I was trained to do. And so I went into industry because I couldn't do that in academia as such, or I didn't think I could. It turns out you could, but so yeah, it was a direct path, and it made me very passionate about what I was doing. So yeah, I think you'd be passionate in any of the three streams.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So what are the main compromises to stay in your own sector? For example, you talked about some of the pros and cons. So what are the biggest things that you had to compromise on to make sure that you could continue within your sector? And maybe I'm going to, again, start from my top right, which is Sarah.
Yeah, so I think sometimes this is a sector that is really, you know, there's a pyramid. So the more you go, the more you proceed with this kind of career, the less opportunities you have. So sometimes really you have to compromise by choosing to stay in academia, but maybe not exactly in the place, in the perfect city or state or nation that you were thinking of for your future. So mostly I would say the compromise is really a geographical compromise if you want. Sometimes you have to pursue your career abroad for years, maybe forever. Sometimes you have the opportunity to go back to your nation. Sometimes you don't want to go back to your nation, but you still have that opportunity and you have to compromise that. So I would say a geographic compromise is the most, yeah. And also think about this. It's a job that is really, really linked to big cities. Generally, you don't have universities in tiny, nice villages along the countryside. So that is something you have to compromise, being in a city, which sometimes might not be at the best of our expectations for life, but that is a big compromise, I would say.
And do you agree, Robin?
Yeah, I was nodding and smiling. Yeah, I agree on the geographical compromise and the expectation of mobility. You know, I moved countries 3 times for a mass spectrometer, which is not what I expected in my life, that I would be making these huge decisions of moving my personal life for a mass spectrometer. And I did it once and then again and again. And that was just pursuing, you know, as Murray said, like the best opportunity that had come along. But yeah, so that would be, I would really agree that that is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting either.
What about industry? What do you think, Murray? What is a big compromise for us if we want to go to industry?
Well, industry requires probably sort of the opposite. Often you move a lot. Certainly in the mining industry, you know, you may be assigned to multiple countries. I've worked in, I don't know, 10, 15 countries in my first job, which was what I wanted at the time, right? I wanted to see the world and get paid to do it because I didn't have the money to do it myself and get the experience of working on rocks all over the planet. So that was a big plus to me. But I know others that were just starting families where it was a big negative, right? I mean, they didn't want to be gone 8 months of the year working in central Brazil and then in Papua New Guinea and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I think it depends on what you want. But moving can be something that, in the industry side, that can either be a plus or a negative.
Do you want to add something, Simon?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, the compromise kind of just needs to reflect your changing values, right? So when I was a researcher, so about a decade of scientific research, I loved science, I loved teaching, and I loved contributing to science and knowledge or having an impact. But as I left academia, my values had changed to prioritizing stability. I still wanted to have an impact. So for me, moving to industry where there's a greater, like a bigger paycheck, but achieving impact was much more limited by company priorities was more difficult. So for me, it made more sense to work more in both the NGO sector, which is EGU, and also in like as a freelancer through science communication, etc. So I now don't do research. I'm a facilitator. I still love science. So part of me does miss that research aspect, but partly now as I have impact through a different way as well. So in one way, I'm not compromising an impact, but I'm having to change how I approach it as my values change as well. So there's always a compromise, as I guess paycheck's a bit less than, say, in industry. I don't get to do research, but I still kind of have impact in my own way, which I actually greatly enjoy. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you to answer very briefly one last question on working in a given sector. I was wondering, so what do you think are the major skills that made you a good fit for your own sector? If you can name 2 or 3 that you think are the major ones. And again, I'm going to go in circles, so starting from Sara.
I think communication skills are extremely important. So being able to really convey your science in an easy way, in an engaging way, and in an approachable way as well. So I think on top of everything, that I think is the #1 skill that is required. I would leave the others to the other panelists.
Do you want to tell us how you practice that skill?
Oh, well, doing outreach as much as I can. Now in the Italian system, it is called the 3rd mission. So it's also actually embedded in the contract. So we are called to do this. by contract. So I try to do this as much as I can. And also I have to say a slight detour in my career helped me a lot with this, because I was teaching at the high school for 1 year. And that helped me, trying to engage, to keep the interest flowing in teenagers is much more difficult than actually having to talk to your peers during EGU or at a conference. And when you go through that multiple days a week and you try to spark interest, the skill really strengthens and gets consolidated.
So it seems like the detour was not necessarily a detour, but just a little addition. What do you think, Robin? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question to kind of reflect on as an academic. It came up earlier that academia is more individual and kind of curiosity driven, doing your research. And I think, so certainly if I reflect on myself, yeah, I really like doing research, and I have had one very determined research direction since I was an undergraduate and had the opportunity to do like a small research project. So I think some quite stubborn determination that I wanted to do this. And that kind of, I mean, I realize this doesn't reflect that well on me, individualistic trait that I think if you are good at working on one thing by yourself, you can thrive in academia. And I think you have to have a high tolerance for failure if you're doing experimental work, because your ideas have to be cutting edge, but that means that a lot of them won't work. You propose something and then you have to have the tolerance for when it doesn't work, So I would say those were things that have helped in academia.
I liked how everybody was nodding when you said resilience to failure. What about Murray? What do you think are the 2 skills that made you successful?
I don't know about 2. I think sort of 3 have come out. Certainly a tolerance for failure. Well, I understand exactly where Robin's coming from with her specific research focus and experimental. As an exploration geologist in industry, we failed many more times than we were successful. So it's a different kind of failure, but it's failure nonetheless, right? I totally agree with communication. That's across all of what we do. And then with Simon, the impact. So the one group of areas that hasn't been talked about much is government, where I've spent a fair amount of my career. And so why did I go to government of all things? To have impact, because that was a way, my research has had narrow impact, I'd say, in the sciences, and that's great. I'm very proud of that. But the work I've done with the U.S. government and then in Brussels has affected many, many, many more people. And that's really great, right? I can actually do things that I think are helping the planet, helping sustainability, et cetera, on a bigger scale. So I think all 3 of those, communication, resilience, if you want to call it, ability to fail, and communication, impact. Yeah, all 3.
What about you, Simon? Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think resilience is something that's embedded in our time in academia as well. But I actually, from my perspective, there's 2 things that kind of which is kind of related. One is the willingness to learn, I think, and also the willingness to take risks. The second one, risk taking, isn't actually my natural characteristic or character, which is funny because my academic background is actually in risk and probability. But for me, it's like I love to strategize. I love to plan. I'm a project manager, right? But eventually you got to do things, and embracing uncertainty is a big part of that, and managing uncertainty as well. And so I find that when I take those risks, I actually learn more. I actually kind of get new perspectives, and that pushes me out my comfort zone. So when I do interviews, for example, there's always people saying, "I have all these skills, etc." It's like, well, can you demonstrate them? And sure, you can demonstrate them by saying, I don't know this technical stuff as a researcher, but actually having other experience you can draw on to demonstrate those skills, I think is much more powerful. So the example is, again, learning. So for me, a lot of the skills that contributed to my current career path weren't just as a researcher, but because I started getting involved in outreach and science communication, but also things even further beyond academia, like setting up a charity during my PhD was not something I ever really planned to do, but actually it got me working with people who have no contact with academia whatsoever. It pushed me to work on my communication skills, organizational skills, etc. So I think taking risks and willingness to learn, I think, is super important as well.
All right, thank you. So we're going to move on to the next big topic, which is transitioning among different jobs. And I would like to start by asking all of you, so what were the challenges? I mean, in particular, I would like to ask Simon and Murray. So how did your career become so varied? So did you actually make strategic decisions? So I'm going to change career, I'm going to change sector, or how did it happen? And also, what were the challenges related to transitioning among sectors? And then I'm going to move on to Robin and Saga as well. Start with Murray. Let's do Murray.
Okay, I'm happy to. So why did I transition? I guess my first big transition was from industry to government. And why? Why? Because I just became very tired. I had a big project. It was huge. It got overwhelming, and there were all sorts of logistical and other issues. And so I just decided time to do something different. All right. And that's why. And getting into government was eye-opening for me. So I loved it. At the same time, I did that for a number of years. And then, am I going to spend the rest of my life in Washington, D.C. doing this? And that seemed sort of mad. I didn't really see myself as a bureaucrat for my entire life. So that's when I went to academia. Somebody invited me to apply for a job. And then I bounced back and forth after that a couple of times. So, once I'd done all three, I actually saw that they all were great. They were all spectacular ways of doing things, and they built upon one another. So, I couldn't have been a successful academic for myself without having been in industry. It provided all the baseline tools, connections, etc. I couldn't have done my job in government without having private sector experience. And really, I was better when I came back to government the second time after having been an academic, because I brought a whole nother strand that I was able to work. So to me, the transitions happen sort of because of life things that are going on, right? You don't really plan that, or I didn't. But they're always stressful. The transitions are stressful, no question about that. I had to move continents, take huge cuts in pay, et cetera, et cetera. But they were all incredibly beneficial.
What do you think, Simon?
My career path is a bit like trying to catch multiple butterflies in one net, I think. I have a lot of interests, and I don't particularly feel like giving them up. So I'm interested in a science policy interface. I'm interested in science communication, interested in impact, and that kind of just guided me kind of to chasing all these experiences. So that included doing my research in like hydrological risks. It also included me trying to figure out, okay, but I like policy, what's going on there? But for all those themes, there are key things that guided me. One was just a geeky obsession with water for some reason, which have meant like, okay, I want to understand policy analysis, so I'll join a hydrological consulting company as a policy analysis, or I'll do my PhD in hydrological risks from climate change, or I'll do science communication, but I'll be focusing on water physics or something like that. So it's a kind of a mixture of, yeah, there's a plurality of experiences, but the key themes have always remained. So like impact and just a general interest in how water works. In terms of transitions, there's always a challenge there. Part of it, I think, part of the success perhaps is naivety. When I changed career out of academia, a lot of academics were like, oh, why are you kind of dropping out and stuff? And like, to me, that was never something I ever imbibed in. I didn't think I was dropping out. And I think if people had told me about it as like a dropout thing, perhaps I'd take more of a second thought. But actually for me, because I didn't even consider it that way at all, I was just like, okay, well, academic page is closed. What's next? Let's move on. I didn't feel particularly chained down by these kind of perceptions of what an academic career should be. Part of choosing to transition is also like a lot of it's personal. So yeah, again, sometimes it's just like, I feel like I've done my time in this sector. What's next? Other part is just towards the end of academia, I found a lot of my experiences there were really draining. And it kind of sucked out the joy of research for me. Some of it is just in terms of how the academic system is set up. Other cases, it was like a lot of interpersonal issues. For example, me and some colleagues frequently were encountered homophobia at different institutions again and again. I'm like, well, do I really want to put myself through this? Sure, those things exist outside academia, but academia has really bad accountability systems. So if this is going to continue to impact me personally, what sector do I really want to be in? So for me, it was like drawing a line of like, okay, am I before that line, in which case I could just focus down on kind of taking step by step and trying to get through difficult situations. But once I hit that line of like, okay, I'm done, I'm moving on. So actually a lot of motivation was just what's of interest to me, what kind of excites me about my career stages, but also like, is this impacting me in a healthy manner? And I found as I grew later into my academic stage and also all these negative interpersonal experiences, I was like, well, I'm done here. So yeah.
Thank you. So I'm just going to ask a very specific question, and this one is actually for Sarah, because so what is it like when you change jobs, when you have multiple offers or different offers within academia? Is it really one of those situations where, oh, I am the boss now, or is it more delicate than that?
Yeah, people tend to think, you know, oh wow, this is luxury problems. This is you shouldn't complain about this or whatnot. Because, but I've been, you know, I've seen these kind of things happening, being offered multiple positions at the same time, and it is difficult to choose. It's very emotionally and mentally draining. So allow yourself time to decide. And it puts you in a very bad position in terms of having to sort of let down people and disappoint people. Somebody will always be disappointed. So I found in my case, I found I had to be as honest as possible, but also as clear as possible on my non-final decision in a way. So you have to clarify even when you're, look, I'm not sure. I need time. You have to be clear with your messages. But I think it's a luxury problem. It's still a problem. So do not think of it as an easy choice for all the reasons that we were mentioning before. So, you know, having to compromise geographically, having to compromise, for example, facilities. So which kind of device, which kind of lab do I have access to in this university, whereas it's not available in the other university? In this university, fieldwork is much better because it's more accessible. In the other, I have to travel a lot, for example, and I have to travel through continents to actually be able to do fieldwork in my area. So there's a lot of yeah, different, you know, kind of yeah, aspects to it that you have to take into account. So it's really an accountancy exercise that you have to make. And yet it's still a compromise. There will never be the perfect solution. So even when offered multiple positions, still it's a problem to choose. So, and I wanted actually to add something about this industry versus academia paths. I've always been an academic, although I've had a chance to transition to industry. I have a feeling that industry is more open for people, but I might be wrong, but I would ask Murray if he agrees with this. But it seems to me that industry is more open to people that keep jumping from academia to industry, whereas academia as a way to sort of count, let's say, the performance of academics, which might sort of put you in a bad light, or anyway in troubles when you spend some years in the industry. I'm just thinking about H indexes, for example, or the kind of, you know, how many first name papers did you publish in the last 10 years? There are systems like this that really seem to enforce you to just stay in academia or either in or out. And so you cannot be kind of, yeah, jumping here and there. There are ways, you know, around these problems, but I think academia in a way is more of a self-consistent world in this sense. It's less open to the transitions.
Would you like to comment on that, Murray? Very briefly.
I can comment real quick. Overall, I'd say that's correct. I'd say, though, there are strategies if you're thinking of, jumping between the worlds that help. So, for instance, what I did, even though I really wasn't thinking of becoming an academic, it must have been in the back of my mind. While I was in industry, I continued to publish, right? And obviously not as much as I did as an academic in any way, shape, or form. But, each year I would go to AGU, EGU, one of the meetings, present, at least have an abstract. I tried to have a paper published, hopefully first author, every other year on something. And my industry, who I work for, was supportive of that. That's something when you do go to industry, to actually think about. Well, you'll be joining someone who will let you publish. So I agree overall, but I think it's easier to transition than you may think if you think about it ahead of time.
Thank you. So I actually wanted to connect to what Sarah was saying about moving countries. So it sounds like a lot of stress. So we're moving on to the impact of career choices on non-professional life. And I was wondering if Robin may have some comments on the toll that all of this stress can take on our non-professional life.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, there's this kind of expectation, or mobility in academia is highly valued, and in my opinion, really overvalued. That there's this expectation that you need to move. So, I mean, I moved a lot. I moved from my master's to a PhD to a postdoc to a job. And yeah, so I mean, a downside is this is stressful and a huge disruption to your life. And I was also, starting a family in the middle of all of this, and a jet-lagged baby is the worst thing in the world. But yeah, so certainly that mobility does have an impact, a negative impact, that it's a big disruption. But I think there is a positive side, that it was also amazing. Like Murray said, I got the opportunity from having grown up in South Africa and not traveled much out of the African continent. I got the opportunity to live in Europe, which was amazing. I spent time in Australia, which was fantastic. And then, yeah, had the opportunity to then move, home to a permanent position. So, yeah, all of that mobility there was like a good side and a bad side. But I think certainly the expectation of this high mobility and then work travel as well, like traveling to conferences and traveling for fieldwork, was something which I had really taken for granted. So for the first kind of 20 years of my career, I did a huge amount of travel like a crazy lady. I took babies to conferences. I did field work while I was pregnant. And it was fine, and I loved it. I thrived in that environment. But then about a year ago, this all started to add up and took a huge toll on my health. And this was a massive shock, that like this kind of high mobility fieldwork conference lifestyle, that I'm not a robot, And I think that was the expectation I had of myself, that I could just keep going. So it was a shock, and I'm still in the process of having to really reevaluate this requirement that is part of academia, but I've also put on myself, that, this kind of hypermobility. And I really liked what Simon was talking about your values and what is actually healthy for you. So, health has different aspects. And for me, it was actually my physical health was taking a toll from traveling so much.
Thank you, Robin. So I'm going to try to go more to the point, because Murray is going to have to leave us in about 20 minutes. And we want to make sure that some audience members can ask their questions. So Robin, you talked about family. I suppose that it must have been not so easy to start a family while at the same time pursuing an academic career.
Well, yes and no. So I had there's never a good time to have a baby, and if you are planning a family, you have a plan in your head, and then there's real life as well. So Yeah, I had my first child at the beginning of a postdoc fellowship, which was good timing because I had the whole fellowship ahead of me. And I took a lot of leave. I took almost, with leave and working part-time, I had almost a year off, which was wonderful. My daughter was only going to be a baby once, and uranium-lead geochemistry didn't change that much in a year, while my daughter did. So academia actually gave me the flexibility to do that. And as a postdoc, no one really minded that I wasn't there. Whereas I had my second child as a lecturer in a new position at a new university with a huge teaching load that I had to do, that was actually my job. So that was actually much more challenging. But again, an advantage was that this was a permanent position and it was unlikely they were going to fire me. So I had the job security, even though my workload was different, and I actually had less flexibility with starting a family. So I think a lot is made of how it's so difficult to balance family and academic work, but in many ways, academia is a very forgiving sector for family life because you have the freedom of your time as well. Whereas other colleagues of mine or other mum friends who were working in industry had much less leave and much greater expectations on their return to work. So yeah, as it's come out, a big theme that's come out, it's always a balance.
And I was going to ask Saga a question. As the only non-native, what was it like moving countries? So what was the impact of the language barrier on your career in general and your non-professional life too?
Yeah, so I moved. The only place I've been outside of Italy was Norway, and the lucky aspect of it is that Norway is really a country where nearly everyone speaks good English. So my English skills were good, and I could, thrive nicely in the work environment. However, outside, I mean, everybody speaks English. Doesn't mean they want to speak English. So there's I would say be careful when you move somewhere. And I didn't have much of a of an outside life, of a life outside my job, because all the people I got to see were fellow foreigners, I would say. So there are situations in which the language is actually a barrier, although English can take you very far and almost everywhere. But in some non-native English contexts, it might be a problem to actually do if you're not able to speak the local language. I learned over 8 years. I managed to learn, but not enough, to be fluent and to be really, enter the society. Let's put it that way. So yes, it is another challenge for sure, and it adds up to the mental burden and to the efforts you have to make to readjust, to rebuild your map every time you move, which is part of the fun, but also very, very demanding. Yes.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to ask you to just maybe share some advice very briefly on, so how do we build a support system if we are constantly traveling, either for fieldwork or to change a job or moving countries and so forth? So how do we make sure that we actually have friends, maybe family if we want family, or pets, I don't know, hobbies, anything? And again, I'm going to go in circles, so starting from Saga.
Yeah, so I think it's important to keep sort of a mothership, or whatever you want to call it. Like one of the mother spaceship has to be somewhere. And in my case, this was my original family in Italy, which is not in Italy where I am now, but it's very close by. And anyway, keeping contact with them throughout the years, going out, going here and there, but just, keeping getting back there as often as I could. So having, let's say, a reference point in the world that you can kind of go back to. But I also can say that, when you stay long enough in another place, that actually becomes another mother spaceship, and that's another reference point. So now it often happens that I go back there because I need support from people that are there, because they are my new family or my new friends. So I do not have a family of my own. So I refer to my family as my original family, but I also refer to family as friends, because I was lucky enough to have a support, group around me. And I mean, when I was in Norway, to have my colleagues and my friends, which became my friends. So I think it's important to just embrace the opportunities to get to know people, even your colleagues, your peers, and just to really bond with people, because it's important. You will need it everywhere you go. You will need it. So yeah, that's my advice.
Thank you. What about Robin?
Yeah, I really agree with what Sarah was saying. And I think you need to be flexible as well. When I moved to Switzerland for my PhD, I was 25. It was very easy to make friends. There was a big cohort of PhD students from all over the world. It was super social, it was super fun, and it was really easy. But my third move back to South Africa was actually much harder. I was in my late 30s. I had 2 small children. And yeah, it was a very different network that I needed. So I think you need to have some flexibility as your life and your needs change. And certainly now, I would say, yeah, when people say, it takes a village, you need a large network to meet your different needs. So, I need someone to fetch my kids from school, and I also need someone sometimes to pour me, a glass of wine and let me complain about my day. So you need a varied network, and you need to be flexible within that.
Thank you. Moving on to Murray, maybe?
I would concur with what Robin just said and Sarah. So having multiple points of reference in your life that you can climb onto wherever they are is just important for everyone, right? So take advantage, whether it's your original family or it's families you have developed as you've moved wherever. That's what's important.
Thank you. And what about Simon?
So for me, especially on a point of what I said, it's not just family, but also friends who are family or chosen family. So finding people who understand you and accept you is really important for getting you through. And that can happen through multiple ways. Sometimes it's just finding someone who does something really cool and sending a message. A lot of the time when you reach out to people, you don't really hear back, and that's fine, people are busy. But when you do, I think that's a really good opportunity to kind of like, we have this mutual interest. In some cases where work can be quite isolating, perhaps especially in academia, finding people going through some experiences for you, I think is really empowering, and especially for developing a support network, or even just thinking, okay, but how can we change this together? So I think definitely developing networks, and as was said before, diversify it as well, friends and family, colleagues, but also not just colleagues for like research purposes or work purposes, but also because, well, we have this similar experience we can bond over and talk about. And I also say, like, do now wherever you go, and you end up with this kind of nice little nodal network around your career path as well. We can always go back to as well, which is I've always found really valuable. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to maybe ask you to comment on some maybe concluding remarks. So a very straightforward question. Murray, is leaving academia the solution to all problems?
No, academia is fantastic. My God. It's great. It's not for everyone, but it's fantastic. It may not be for even people who are in academia the best place for them to be for all their career. But before you leave academia, think about it long and hard, right? Because it can be more difficult to get back in. I guess that's what I'd say. I mean, the one thing I guess I'd say here, since this is sort of, getting to me anyway, to the conclusion, is no matter where you are in industry, academia, or government, who's your boss, and can you work for them, and do you trust them? Right? And if you don't, leave.
Yeah.
Right? So be happy with your job. That's the main thing. Are you happy? Are you overall happy? I mean, any of our jobs are a pain in the rear end on any random day, right? That's just for sure. I've had really bad days in academia. I've had really bad days in government, and same with industry. So that's a universal, right? You're always going to have crappy things happen. But I've been very lucky, and also then later in my career worked to ensure that who I'm working for, I trust. And I have left jobs in at least two of the sectors because I ended up with bosses that I didn't respect. All right, so I changed jobs, and each one of those times was a really good decision on my part. So I encourage everyone to actually think about their situation and think about, you know, who they're working with and do they respect them, and does it excite them what they're doing? Do they think they're impactful? However, whether it's impactful in terms of education, educating young people or old people, impactful in terms of the research, which is really expanding our knowledge base, all right, you know, impactful in doing something that's really helpful for society. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there is this notion that academia is bad and industry is good, that maybe is not necessarily the truth.
No.
So I am going to ask you directly a question coming from the audience, just because I know that you have to leave in a few minutes. Is there a way to do research or science without having to stay in academia?
Who's that to?
That's for you, Murray, since I know that you have to leave soon.
So say again, is there a way to do science? Say it again.
Is there a way to do geoscience research or science, I would translate to, without having to stay in academia?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can do good science in any of the three areas. Right? There's no question about that. The way the science is done may be slightly different. In industry, in general, it will be applied science, right? So you're using science to get to something that the industry wants to do. At the same time, when I was in industry, I did lots of blue sky science because I was convinced by my bosses that we needed that knowledge to be able to get to the goal they wanted. Right? So then we did it. In government, I was mainly managing science as opposed to doing science. I did some, but you know, I managed it more. But Simon will be able to speak to this after I go. Project managing of science directs how the science actually happens. It is science in a way, right? And so I think that's really valuable too. And it is a way of doing science. It's just maybe slightly removed. So, you know, when I was at USGS, I had a huge budget and I had 2,000 scientists working for me. And did I get to do most of that individual science? Absolutely not. I wrote one or two things and I worked in one or two research groups myself, but I was so proud of all this incredible science all those scientists did, right? That was really fulfilling, incredibly fulfilling. So anyway, Simon, since he's doing something similar, probably is another one that should answer some of this. And thanks.
Thank you, Murray. So I would like to end the panel discussion here, unless anybody has any comments that they would like to add. And I would like to start sharing, since I suppose that people are going to have to leave at some point, to take a few more questions. And we're going to open the Q&A session now. And sorry, this is not reacting. There we go. And if anybody decides to leave, I would kindly appreciate it if you could answer a poll that you can access using the QR code appearing on the screen, or which should also be shared in the chat, Eduardo, if I am not mistaken. And I think that so we can open the Q&A session. If there are any questions on Slido, or if people want to ask their questions in the Q&A here on Zoom. And also, you can also raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Yes, we have a question from the public, Veronica.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be possible for a person with about 8 years after PhD to find a position outside academia? For all the panelists, I think.
I guess that this is a question for maybe Robin and Saga. Oh, you can go first, Robin.
Okay, I just wanted to understand the question. So is the question, is it possible with 8 years post-PhD to find a position outside academia? So,
yes.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I would say yes. I'm sure during that 8 years, even though it might not feel like it, you've gathered really valuable skills. You know, I think when you're inside academia, you're not necessarily aware of the skills that you have. of like writing, communicating, asking questions, identifying gaps in a set of knowledge. So I would say yes, for sure, from my side.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. There's a lot of skills we're not aware of having, even, really preparing slides with PowerPoint or using any kind of, graphic manager or any kind of, data science. So having a data set and finding the average, the statistical, approach to assess your data set, all of that is skills that we don't even think about we have, but it's skills, and totally, yes, absolutely possible.
We have another question that says, what soft skills would you recommend students build which will facilitate transition in and out of the private academic sector? Communication, empathy, people skills. I really like empathy, sorry. Who wants to answer? I wouldn't know who to ask this question specifically. I see that Sarah is unmuted. Maybe you want to go first?
Yeah. Having a positive attitude, I would say. I really think it's beneficial, because when you act grumpy, look grumpy, just go on protesting about everything, that's not useful either in academia or in the industry. So having a positive attitude, if we can think about it as a soft skill, not just, I'm not just saying, your capability. We covered already the topic of, being a good communicator, but just your attitude, I think, is absolutely important. So being a team player, because if you have a positive attitude, you can be a good team player. You can, tame conflicts, and so I would say the positive attitude is absolutely a valuable skill that everyone should have.
Anybody else want to comment?
Jump in. I really like empathy as a response. There's two ways I look at these psychosocial skills. There's a fundamental level, and then there's the skills you build on top of that. The fundamental skills are what people often consider as things that are decided from birth, but this is actually false, we know from research. So things like empathy or emotional intelligence or self-awareness, your decision-making skills, your ability to reflect, your confidence. Working on those then impacts your ability to do other skills, such as being able to read a room, being able to negotiate, to be able to think creatively and resolve conflicts, and being willing to learn. So basically building up whenever what's been said. Like, work is relational. You need to be ready to deal with that, especially if you move back to academia. But still in academia, I think there's a lack of, I'm not sure the word I'm looking for, but perhaps these psychosocial skills aren't as prominent on people's minds as they should be. So these skills, I think, are really super important to kind of like focus and build on. I had another point, but it's gone. Sorry.
What about Robin? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think networking, and we have talked about networking, but I think when most people think about networking, we think of like this pyramid and that you need to get to know influential people. But I think just as important is your peer network. So particularly, for the master's and PhD students in the audience, your cohort who are with you now, as you move on through your career, the chances are this peer network will be incredibly valuable to you. So I really like what Sarah and Simon were saying about like empathy and a positive attitude. And I would add to that is to really foster your peer network, because not only this is your support network now, but these will be your future colleagues. And, as other people's career paths move in and out of industry and academia, what they say, it's not who you know, but who knows you, that's also valuable. So your visibility in your network, and a lot of that, which has been really important to me, has been from my actual peer network.
I'm going to comment on that because Casita and I did our PhDs together, and here we are today. So it's very to the point. So we have a question from Slido, and this one is for Simon and others. most important advice on how to get into science policies, where to start, what tips would you give to someone interested in getting into government?
So it's tricky because areas like science policy and other areas like science communication do suffer from a lack of professionalization. So there's often a lack of roles which are dedicated to these positions. Often what you'll do is you'll kind of adopt a role, and science policy might be part of that. I think one of the best ways to kind of navigate that is first kind of look for experience. EGU does offer a lot of these. Sometimes these are just the online hangouts, which are just networking opportunities. Sometimes you can apply to shadow an MEP at European Parliament in Brussels, or try and get involved with science policy events we have at EGU, for example. So part of that is to kind of gain experience through which you build a network. Other than that, it's trying to see what organizations kind of offer these science policy positions. Sometimes it's voluntary. Again, scientific divisions at EGU often have science policy positions which you can volunteer at. For paid positions, it is tricky because of the lack of professionalization. You could try and get a job at, for example, EU Joint Research Centre. They often look for people to join them. Often working for NGOs like EGU, for example. I'm not the policy manager, but I do support a lot of policy projects we have here. I think the key point is get the experience, build a network, and then it becomes easy to see, like, okay, who are you interested in working for? Because the point of working for governments as well is it can be quite fickle. When I talk to people who are working for governments, like when perhaps politicians change over, that can really shape the role, and you have to be comfortable like knowing who you're working for as well. So yeah, I think experience, networks, and identifying like what areas, because I mean, I'm mostly talking about EU level stuff here, which is where we focus as an organization, but there's also national level organizations and subnational level as well. So pick your scale, I guess, is the other part to it.
Thank you. And we have another question that says, this is a question for Saga. So how was it to be a high school teacher for 1 year and then to come back to academia?
Yeah, so when I started that, I didn't have in mind that I would be back to academia. So for me, that was a permanent transition to being a school teacher. Then I was lucky enough to win a grant and get back to academia. So I enjoyed it, but being back to academia was kind of coming back home feeling. So I think 1 year wasn't enough to really adjust to the new mindset. For sure, there's more freedom in academia, but I would say what you really have in common between the two worlds is this value of education, as Robin was saying before. And surely it taught me a lot about how to speak to young people, because the further I grow in academia, the larger the age gap is with the first year students, for example. So learning their lingo, their way of thinking, their attention span was absolutely beneficial to what I'm doing now. So I would say it helped a lot, but they're two very, very different worlds.
There is another question for everybody. So it says, the higher you climb the ladder, the less opportunities you get. Do you still feel like having a choice? Do you still feel like having a choice for your career at that stage? Guess maybe we can ask Robin.
Yeah, I saw that question and it really resonated with me. So I think there's some truth to this. So I mean, on a bad day, I certainly feel that I'm kind of trapped in academia, and I've done the same thing for so long. And I'm only really good at one thing. And so I think there is some truth in that, but I think there is also another side, that even within academia, there's still variability. So academia isn't just research. So I spoke earlier about teaching, and there's also within academia kind of research management. And the further along I have come as an academic, I love my research, and I really enjoy it, but I'm also fascinated by kind of university admin. And instead of just being on the receiving end of university administration, as you get higher, to actually begin to contribute and to, you know, instead of complaining about the sausage, like make it yourself, right? So, yeah, on a bad day when I feel trapped, I feel like this is still, there is flexibility even within academia of different roles within that you can pursue.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I think it also depends on, I really agree with what Robin was saying. And I think it also depends very much on the nation you are set. Because from my experience in the Scandinavian world, you're not old, you're never old to start a new job, to change your job. So if you're, let's say, 55 and you're tired of academia, you're tired of your career, and you want to start over, in Scandinavia, it is entirely possible, especially, I mean, even for a woman, no problem whatsoever. In Italy, for example, I have a feeling when you're over 40, 45, you start to kind of, people start to see you as the person you're in, as the role you cover in your job. So if you have been an academic, you will always be an academic. Or if you're a teacher, you will always be a teacher. Or if you're a baker, you're going to be a baker forever. So I think it's really cultural also. So there's always a way out. You can always, you know, start a new career, but it is harder in some cultures than it is in others.
Yeah, just to quickly contribute to that as well. Working for EGU means I have the privilege of accessing a huge network of scientists from across many, many disciplines. And I will say, working with them, many of them have changed career many times. People far more my senior have jumped from academia to work for consultancy firms, for example. Marie was a great example of someone who's had a diverse background. So of course, there's the cultural factors, but I'd say one of the biggest barriers I think people seem to have is the barriers they put on themselves, right? I think there's sometimes a lot of unlearning you need to do. Even like when I moved countries and jumped out of academia, even now, sometimes I go like, am I stuck here and stuff? I'm like, well, what did you mean? Like a few years ago, you just changed country. A few years ago, you changed disciplines. You can still do that. And I'm already building these barriers in my head. So I think when it comes to changing job roles, careers, etc., you need to make sure you also kind of do the self-work to kind of unlearn those barriers that might have been put upon you. But yeah, like just talking and to all the scientists of many different career levels, people change quite frequently. So I think it's something you should take as always an option.
There's another really good question that says, do you find specific courses in project management and business skills useful in your line of work in and out of academia, or better learn on the job? So I guess that maybe another way to phrase that question is, are there courses to acquire your skills, or do you learn them on the job? And what was the case for you in your experience?
I can go ahead by saying that I had a very, very good experience with writing proposal, master courses, or how do you call them? I'm not sure. Like, you know, those crash courses that you go somewhere for 3 days and they just teach you how to write a proposal. Usually they are call specific, so they are specific for Marie Curie, for example, actions or for ERC actions. I found those courses extremely helpful. So if you manage to enter one of those, do it, because they are incredibly helpful. And also I had the privilege to actually take part to a leadership course organized by the University of Oslo. And I have to say that gave me a lot of insights into what it means to manage, for example, a group, and very, very useful bits and pieces of information that are they're not strictly scientific, but they are, you know, they help you a lot in this management aspect of the career. So I would say those courses, just do them if anyone ever offers you to enter one of those.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. As a postdoc, I did every single career development course that was on offer. Grant writing, yeah, everything. They weren't all useful, but overall, yeah, I just took every opportunity to do every single course. But I've also had the experience as I've become more senior of, having to learn on the job and making mistakes, and having to deal with the consequences of, supervisor-student relationships becoming unworkable, managing a teaching load, managing communication with big undergraduate classes, managing my time, managing my meetings. And I had to just kind of learn how to do that. And the solutions often aren't very sophisticated. Like I just use my Outlook online calendar, and send a lot of meeting requests. So yeah, I think do whatever courses you can, but you also have to accept that there is always going to be some learning on the job. You can't perfectly prepare for a position.
Would you like to add something, Simon?
Yeah, I think there's not much to ask. I think the answers are quite good, but I'd say there's theory and there's practice, and you need both to excel. So I'd kind of suggest trying both. As someone who's gone from a researcher to a project manager, freelancing science communicator, etc., part of that is just taking the risks, trying to be uncomfortable. Because if you're uncomfortable, that means you're on a learning curve, right? So there's a phrase, I think, from fantasy media that the scariest cave has the best treasure. So in that case, it's kind of like, well, if I want to learn, then I need to put myself in that learning environment and challenge myself. So absolutely, I think chase those opportunities, but also don't be afraid to kind of create your own opportunities if you can. There's some places. So to talk about EGU again, we do offer funding for other career scientists to create their own training schools, for example, speaking of that. But also just, again, building networks and collaborating people, saying, I want to do this, are you interested in this? That also is a great way to kind of just challenge yourself. That's how, for example, I set up a charity. That wasn't a training course, that was just us identifying a problem and saying, let's do something about it. So I think there's definitely practice and theory, there's the formal way of getting experience, and then there's these informal ways as well, which you get through your networks.
Thank you. So I'm just going to say something about we're having some trouble with the poll for feedback, so we're trying to solve this. So if you stay with us for a few more minutes, hopefully we will have a solution to have some feedback. There is another question coming from the chat. It says, hi everybody, I'm a master's student in experimental geosciences in its final semester, and I am applying for trainee programs and internships focused on science policy rather than research. In general, I have the impression that the work of a geologist is not well known to the majority of the hiring committees. My question is, how can a geologist make its skills valuable outside of academia? And what could these skills be? I don't know who may answer this question. Maybe Simon? It says, I am a master's student in experimental geosciences. I am applying for trainee programs and internships focused on science policy.
I think there's a lot of skills that come from any kind of science. I mean, this is the challenge we all face, that I faced as well. Coming from doing a PhD, we're highly specialized. But when you work into more of these kind of policy spheres, these communication interfaces, you end up kind of stepping more in a generalist role. But a generalist role is still quite powerful because you get to pull multiple experiences. I think part of it is just really identifying the needs of what these policymakers are. Like, so you can bring in specialist knowledge about how, not just about your field, but also how like researchers work. People are interested in engaging with scientists, engaging with academics. How do they do that? Well, you have the experience of the academia now to kind of bring that forward, for example. You might have specialist knowledge in geology, but you can also have a broader knowledge, which you can also bring. Okay, these people are interested in mining, these people are interested in landform changes or hazards and things like that. Well, you also have a broader knowledge we can pull on to work with that as well. A lot of it is just communication. A lot of people in policy tends to work at a much faster timescale than academia does. And what they want is options and solutions. So again, when you're looking to policy, well, as a geologist, I can inform you that these are the 5 best solutions to this perhaps environmental problem. Might not be the best ones, but these at least I can inform you on this particular thing. So it really is a communication exercise. Can you identify what their needs are? Can you identify what they actually want as an outcome? And can you pull on not only just specialized experience, but broader academic knowledge, but also experience and knowledge of academic networks and how they function as well?
Thank you. Does anybody have other comments on what Simon said? Not really, right? I have maybe a general question. Is academia still, I don't know how to phrase this, but sorry if I come across as a bit blunt, but is academia still very discriminatory towards women, towards minorities in general? Who wants to go first? Like here it's like open basically.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the answer is yes. And I mean, I'm a white woman. I have a lot of white privilege. English is my first language. So, and I've still experienced, you know, my fair share of discrimination. And I'm not coming from a real minority experience. So I would say yes.
Me to contribute, I'd also say yes as well. That's certainly my experience, but not just for homophobia. When I talk to colleagues who experience misogyny, who experience racism, it's kind of the same pattern again. And what you find is because academia doesn't have really any proper accountability structures, like supervisors are also your project manager, they're also HR department. Solutions don't really come forward, and often I find because people are often quite close-knit friends, when you try and hold things accountable, people just end up kind of supporting their friends anyway, so you don't really get anything moving. I'll also find that academia likes to think it doesn't have perhaps a political culture, likes to think of it as apolitical, but that work culture has been built up over a long history of the kind of the same people being there. So when someone comes in who is seen as political, because that's how society treats us, like people love to call being gay a political thing when it's like, well, just how I am, then they see you as when they politicize you, right? So that often means that you're often seen as politicized, you're often seen as not being the right place, the right person to be in academia. It often means you get isolated. It often means people can talk about their relationships if they're straight, but if you do the same thing, if you're gay, oh, this is inappropriate. It's a bit weird. So for sure, I think it's like, and this is my experience from different institutions moving around, the same patterns. It's not just this, experiencing homophobia, but the same patterns of homophobia crop up again and again. So yeah, for me, definitely.
I agree with both of you, but I also want to kind of give a sort of positive perspective on this from the let's say gender balance let's say point of view in terms of female you know the presence of women in STEM and in science and in geology is, I think, getting better with time. I'm seeing this in Italy, where there's a long track record for being clearly, you know, a men-dominated. I mean, academia in Italy is absolutely still men-dominated, but let's say really the university is making big efforts to sort of balance out the gender gap. And I think this is really, it's important to say it, and it's important to see that some things are being done. For example, there's rules now saying that, you know, or best practices saying that, you know, in presence of all other, with all other conditions equal, a female hire is kind of preferred or anyway encouraged. So I think we have to also say that things are, the future doesn't look necessarily super bright, but things are getting slightly better. And in my case, for example, I really saw this when I got this position, that me being the only woman in the entire list of people that applied for the job, still I got the job, not necessarily just because I was the woman, but it is an important, you know, it's important to say it. So to the young generations and to the for example, master students, just don't be afraid of this. If you're a woman in STEM, do not be afraid. There's still probably a long way to go, but there are possibilities.
Yeah, I would also like to add to this that Simon's point about the lack of accountability in academia is really a problem. But to pick up with what I was saying is that, you know, the longer you stay in academia and the more senior you become, you can move into the kind of more administrative roles. And this is something which I found really rewarding, is working on like a code of conduct for the faculty that I'm in. And so that at least we've gone from no accountability and no reporting structures to something. So this doesn't solve the problem, but it's like it moves the needle and it's a small step.
It's good also to see people coming together and actually working together to try to solve the problem instead of the one person complaining in the toilet, I don't know, or venting to the wall. So it's great to see that. So in the meantime, we have solved the problem with the poll. So now you can find a new link in the chat. Maybe I'm going to ask one very last question, or if there are any other questions from Slido or from the chat, or any questions from the other moderators as well, or any comments from the panelists in general, so that we can give some time to the people to answer the poll. Any questions from Slido or from the chat, from the Q&A?
Yeah, there
I
was
think
a question in the chat, which was, how do you find a balance between your career, one with your partner, and quality time with your children? So this is a great question. We have to keep asking this question, and there's no one answer. And I think, you know, the mistake you can make is that you think that balance is something that you can achieve, like a first author paper. It's something which you have to like work on all the time. And I also accept that at times, you know, when say you go to EGU, your like family life balance is completely on the work side, right? And that then there will be other times when you need to focus more on your family. So I think it's never easy to maintain a balance, and it takes active work all the time. And a balance for different people is also different. And this will also change throughout your life. Like small children need a lot of attention, but as your children become older, they become more independent as well. So yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's one which we have to keep asking.
yeah, Simon. Or
yeah, I mean, on my side, I can say it's really important to put some boundaries. For example, setting, you know, times outside of like, for example, I'm not going to answer any email that arrives after 8 p.m. That's a no-go. I'm gonna spend weekends doing what I like and not working. That doesn't mean that throughout the year there will not be any weekend during which I work, because there will be, because for example you have a deadline, because for example you have a allocated beam time at a synchrotron over the weekend. You have to do that, but then try to I think it's quite important to just seek for a sort of buy out some time for yourself, and just be aware that nobody wants a burnout, because once you're in that situation, you're useless for academia, for yourself, for your family. So never get to the level. Just recognize when you're really approaching the level of burnout, and stop ahead of that, because there's really no point. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't make you write a better paper or anything. So I would say it's important to cut out some moments for yourself.
and maybe sometimes a change in job or position or so forth can also help remove you from specific situations. So sorry, Simon, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Speaking as someone who did get burnt out after their PhD, schedule your breaks and keep to it. If I didn't schedule my breaks in, I just work right through and ended up doing damage to myself. And also just have something outside of your work that isn't work related at all. For me, I do amateur bodybuilding, and I find having that time to go to the gym, which is just for me to focus on my health, focus on my mind, it's just a kind of a reset switch, right? So not only should you schedule and plan in your rest, you need to rest well to work well in the end. Also just have something that's kind of distracting and not related to your work at all to focus and build on.
Right, thank you. So if there are no other questions, I may close the Q&A session here. My apologies again for the poll link not working properly. It was the first time I used it, so very sorry. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you so much to the panelists for agreeing to be here. It was absolutely great to have your insight, and I am sure that all of us, certainly me, learned a lot from learning from listening to you. So thank you very much. Thank you also to the moderators for helping out with the organization and with today's moderation. And hopefully next year we will manage to bring the this event back into the General Assembly program of EGU. So thank you very much, and I wish everybody a nice evening or a nice day wherever you are.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a
Bye.
lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.